round four with Stephen Morris talking about the amalgamation of DBT and schema therapy. And before we get into today's topic, I just wanted to kind of give a brief outline of two terms. One we have is distress tolerance. Another one is emotional regulation. I'm personally have had times difficulties trying to distinguish the difference between the two. So could you just clarify for the listeners what they mean and what the difference is?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, we've got to understand the process of DBT. Okay, so just briefly, each of the DBT skills training modules serves a specific purpose in creating, building, or maintaining something in living the life we want to live and being the person we want to be. So first of all, the self-awareness aspect of things, the self-analysis, aspect of things, basically creates the opportunity for us to build dialectical thinking. So dialectical thinking is the synthesis of two opposites. So, when you look at things in life, everything is pretty much on a continuum. Not everything, but almost everything is on a continuum. So at one side, you've got one point of view. At the other side, you've got another point of view. What we have a tendency of doing is thinking in all or nothing terms. So, yes, no, right, wrong, black, white, these absolutes. And what dialectical thinking is the synthesis of these two opposites and the space in between. So, we can recognize that this is right, this is wrong from a particular point of view, but in between there is this dialectical space. So the self-analysis aspect of things, which we talked about in conversation one, builds this opportunity to create dialectical thinking, which is super, super important. Mindfulness is how we build self-awareness. So the skills of DBT, observe and describe, participate non-judgmentally, one mindful activities, all the stuff that we talked about when it comes to mindfulness is to build the awareness for how we slip into distress. So distress is fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract. And the skills of distress tolerance are designed to manage the parts of our personality that start to slip into these old ways of coping with that distress. So distress tolerance skills build new habits. We do that by implementing them every day. So accepts and improve the stop skill, tip skill, all these things that we talked about before. So distress tolerance is all about building new habits for the way we handle the distress that comes into our system. Emotion regulation, which is what we're going to talk about today, is how we start to create new perspectives. Because when we can handle the distress, we can start to regulate the emotion. When we go into distress, we're outside of that window of opportunity or window of tolerance for dealing with the emotion in a healthy, effective, and adaptive way. So we're into distress and we're going into fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract. So once we can handle that distress, we can start to learn how to regulate the emotion. So emotion regulation skills are all about removing the rigidity that we have to a particular story being 100% accurate all of the time. And this is where the integration of schema therapy really becomes super, super important, because we're practicing mode management in distress tolerance. We're trying to manage the modes of behavior that are reacting to the distress because we're in that state of fight or flight. With emotion regulation, we're now actually going to start working with the stories, the schema, the things that are going on underneath the surface, the way that our internal narrative is driving the emotional response that then activates the behavioral response, because of the rigid belief that we have to behave a certain way when this story is active in our system. Does that make sense?
It does. And I just want to clarify for people that are listening and for myself as well. There's a term I hear, frustration tolerance. Would it be the same when we're talking? Yes, in a sense.
Yeah, because frustration is basically, so in dialectical behavior therapy, it's an emotion-focused therapy, right? It's trying to understand that our emotions, when our emotions are active in our system and we go outside of that window of tolerance, there are rigid behavioral responses that happen in our system, and frustration falls under there are 10 emotions in DBT, and then each of those emotions has a continuum of feelings and other things that fall underneath it. Frustration falls on the continuum of anger. So if you're in a space of frustration, you're falling under the emotional continuum of anger. And if that frustration is building, it's going to take you into a space of distress. So when you go into distress, you're now in fight, flight, freeze, submit, distract, and those automatic behaviors are going to kick in. The thing that's creating the frustration is the story that's in your system. Now, a lot of people, one of the statements I hear quite a bit is, if you're talking about anxiety or whatever emotion you're talking about, but let's just use anxiety, right? They'll say, I really struggle with anxiety and life just gives me anxiety. It's not life that gives you anxiety. It's your story about life that gives you anxiety. So when we get into emotion regulation, we're starting to work with the story that's creating the anxiety, the story that's creating the frustration, the story that's creating the fear, the disgust, the sadness, whatever it is that's in our system that's sending us into that state of fight or flight. It revolves around the story that we're telling ourselves about those particular situations. And we are constantly, as human beings, if you look at this from a schema therapy perspective, we are constantly existing in the realms of one story or another, always. That story might be effective and adaptive. It might be, I feel emotional fulfillment. I feel like I socially belong, so I fit in. I've got a pretty healthy sense of self, so I'm adapting to situations in a very effective way to live the life I want to live. And at the same time, there are times in our life where we slip into those maladaptive and ineffective schemas that revolve around things like social isolation, so I don't fit in, emotional deprivation, you're not going to give me the love that I need, abandonment, mistrust of self or others, like all these different stories that when they kick in, take us into this space of emotional distress. And then there is a rigid behavioral response that kicks in our system, trying to cope with that emotional distress. So in distress tolerance, we're trying to manage those behavioral responses so that we can teach our system how to handle that distress in a healthy way. In emotion regulation, now we're going to go to work on the stories that are underneath the surface. So it is really important that we understand that, for me, DBT is a process, especially when we integrate it with schema therapy. It's also a lifestyle. What we don't want to do is just know DBT and then put the book back on the shelf. Like the first time I did DBT many, many years ago, I just did DBT. I learned what the skills were. I understood them. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. Put the book back on the shelf and forgot all about it. So, when we're understanding working from a DBT perspective, for me, dialectical behavior therapy is a lifestyle. It's something that we need to build into the way that we are living our lives. It's about living the life we want to live and being the person we want to be. So, emotion regulation, if we dive straight into the emotion regulation skills at the beginning of any work, to be perfectly honest with you, for most people, that's not going to be effective, because emotion regulation is where all of those vulnerabilities are. It's where those stories are. It's where those unmet childhood needs are that we're going to try to go to work on removing the rigidity to them. So we have to go through the process, understanding that self-analysis is super important so that we can start to create the dialectical thought process of the synthesis of two opposites. Mindfulness, so that we can build the awareness for the distress and the thought process and the feelings and things that are happening in our system, build that muscle of recognizing those things. Distress tolerance, so that we can teach our system when distress comes into our system, this is how we deal with it in a healthy way. We don't go off and start using substances or going into those maladaptive and ineffective behavioral responses, so that we can get into the emotion regulation aspect of things. If you dive straight into the emotion regulation aspect of things, your system goes into an emotional backlash most of the time, and you start getting behavioral responses coming out that are just not effective. Is that, you understand what I mean?
And if I can give you an example of what I was thinking while you're speaking is, and I want to think of the dialectical nature of this question, answer, and then this process within it is going to a concert is something I really do enjoy. I'll rigidly say I enjoy concerts. If people ask me if I had a good time, there is a very dialectical answer within that because of all the experiences that happen within the concert. Overall, yes, but there are things that I'm trying to work with when it comes to my DBT practice so that I can mitigate some of the interactions that I'm having and the emotional response.
Yeah.
Right now, what I've talked to you about, I'm managing my modes. It's the language, distress tolerance, mode management, same thing here, but I'm able to manage the behavior, but I want to work on the fact that certain things are activating, anxiety within me while I'm in the crowd. So that when I go to the concert, the next time it doesn't. it's not a mode management no more. It's not activating me anymore because I've gotten to that point. I'm not there yet. But to think that I'm going to just read a book, jump into a concert one day and go, yeah, no, 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 that stuff. I think some people, and I may be guilty of it too, practice apathy at that point where there's a sense of, no, I'm fine. And it's like, no, you're not. No, I'm not. I'm really not. I'm saying
Yeah.
I am, but I'm not.
Yeah, and that's one of the distress, right? Fight, flight, freeze, submit, distract. If you're in apathy, it's probably some kind of avoidance that's falling under one of those categories.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I wrote some notes I just want to go over here.
Yeah.
When it comes to emotional regulation, specifically, you've talked about some of the other tools that we've done. Are there specific skills that people would practice in the state of emotional regulation, mnemonics, acronyms that we could help with?
Yeah, so emotion regulation is actually one of those ones that doesn't use a lot of mnemonics. We use quite a few mnemonics in distress tolerance, mindfulness. There's a lot of different times where there are specific words that are connected to the skills that give us the steps that we're supposed to take. When we get into emotion regulation, we start to shift away a little bit from those mnemonics, and it just becomes specific skills that we're going to use to try to remove the rigidity of belief that's connected to a particular story. So everything in emotion regulation, first of all, emotion regulation starts with validation. It's one of those little um, catchphrases that we like to say at DBT. Understanding, first of all, that everything that we do is driven by the story that we're telling ourselves. Okay. So we are constantly reacting to stories. Whatever your story is right now is how you're behaving in this particular situation. Whatever my story is right now is how I'm behaving in this particular situation. So, I'm hoping that right now both of us have got a pretty adaptive and effective story going on. So we're behaving in a way that is helping us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be. In other words, we're not in a state of fear in any way. We're not reacting to a maladaptive or ineffective schema that's active in our system. We're probably in both in pretty healthy spaces, right? So when there is a story that
There's
kicks
one.
in, what's that?
I said, and there's one. There's a schema that could pop up at that
Yeah,
moment.
yeah.
There. Ah,
Shit, why did that happen?
right.
I'm such a loser. No, there we go. So the thing about emotion regulation and working with the stories that are active in our system is that sometimes the schema that we are reacting to, the stories that are active in our system. So just touching real briefly, schema is the contextual framework for the stories that we tell ourselves. The content is the individual story. So you've got very individual and unique stories based on your experiences, just like I've got very individual and unique stories based on my experiences. But the stories we tell ourselves can fit into a contextual framework, and that is the schema. So a schema of mistrust is where I'm either not trusting other people or I'm not trusting myself. A schema of abandonment is where I feel like people will always leave me. On the flip side of that, those schemas are on a continuum. They're not on or off, black or white. They've got polar opposites in the stories that we tell ourselves. So a schema of social isolation, for example, is on one side of the continuum. So if when I'm thinking I'm in this space and I'm rigidly attached to the schema of social isolation, then all I'm seeing around me is the fact that I'm socially isolated. I don't fit in. I don't belong anywhere. People don't accept me. I don't get other people and they don't get me. And I'm rigidly in this space of mind, seeking all the evidence that lines up with this particular story. On the other side of the continuum is social belonging. So if I'm always over here, I feel like I fit in everywhere and everybody loves me and this is wonderful. But this isn't true either because we don't fit in every single space. That's just not possible. Sometimes we don't relate to other people. Sometimes we don't have the same beliefs as other people, right? So the dialectical perspective is that the story is going to, when it's healthy, when it's effective, when it's adaptive, is going to fall somewhere in between these two polar opposites. So I don't, it's not that I never fit in, and it's not that I always fit in. Somewhere in between is where we're going to exist in a healthy and adaptive way, right? So whenever our story is active, one of the first things that we have to learn to do is, and this is one of the first skills of emotion regulation, is we first of all have to learn how to check the facts. Now, this is a very challenging skill to try to learn, because a lot of people, and myself included, when I started doing this work, we believe that our story is a fact. And this is the problem, right? Because I see the way that I am seeing the world when I'm attached to a particular story as, well, that's just fact. I hear people say it all the time. I used to say it all the time. When they start having conversations about the way that they see the world, they say, well, that's just fact. It's the way that it is. Is it? And checking the facts is one of the first things that we have to learn to do, so that we can distinguish the difference between the facts of the situation and our story about the situation. Now, the facts are things that are just indisputable. Anybody that would look at this situation would say, yes, that is the case, right? It's not an opinion. It's not a thought process. It's not a belief. It's not like, well, that's just what they meant. No, that's a story. Now, it doesn't mean that that story is wrong. It doesn't mean that that story is bad. It doesn't mean that that story isn't, accurate based on your previous experience, but it isn't a fact right now. So in DBT, the skills follow the process of what's called scaffolding. So they build on each other. They start to get bigger and bigger. And when we get into radical acceptance, which we talked about in the last conversation, a lot of that revolves around what are the facts of the situation. So now that we're getting into emotion regulation, we're building on that what are the facts of the situation, so that we can apply them to the story that we're actually responding to, right? So checking the facts is the very first thing that we need to do to see, is my story close to what's actually happening, or is there a lot of things that I'm making assumptions for? Am I reacting to a childhood experience? Is there a certain amount of fabrication that's going on here, an assumption that's going on here? Like, what's the difference between what's so and what I'm telling myself about the situation? Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to ask a question to it, in that, in this part, are we trying to figure out the meaning? Like, for instance, if I'm in a situation where I feel as though I don't belong, if I'm okay, like if that story's active and I'm in an environment, it's like, yeah, you know what, I don't belong and I'm okay. I don't know if I'm really, looking to explore that schema. It's when I'm don't belong and there's a fear in my system from that not belonging, that I may explore. So it's not just the schema in my thoughts right now. It's the meaning I'm tying to not belong. Is that right, Stephen? Like,
Yeah. So the schema is where the meaning comes from, right? This is why, for me, schema therapy is amazing. When we start to look at the different schemas that are active in our system, and then, which is the context, and then the individual content for the stories that we're telling ourselves, that's all the meaning that we're attaching to situations. And we, as human beings, we are meaning-making machines. I love that expression. We attach meaning to absolutely everything that we do. This means this means that, this means this means that, like constantly attaching meaning, which is another way of saying that we are constantly reacting to our own individual stories in the situation. So when we're checking the facts, we're trying to see, what's the meaning that I'm attaching to this situation, and is that meaning accurate? Just because I'm attaching a meaning to a situation doesn't mean that it's not accurate. If, to use your example, if I don't fit in and if I don't belong, okay, is that because, what's the meaning that I'm attaching to that? Is that because simply, these people are just not people that I've got anything in common with? If I'm in a situation where, I don't know, just to use a light-hearted example, let's say I'm somebody that's not into sports, and I find myself surrounded by people that are all talking about, I don't know, we live in Canada, so I find myself surrounded by people that are talking about hockey, ice hockey, for those outside of Canada that might think
for
of.
those who need us to name a surface.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because there is field hockey too.
Sure.
So, and floor hockey. So, if I'm surrounded by people that are talking about ice hockey, for example, and I've got absolutely no interest in that, and my schema of social isolation kicks in because I don't fit in here, I don't belong here. Okay, this isn't my tribe. These aren't people that I've got anything in common with. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm stupid. It doesn't mean I'm an idiot. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. It just means that this is not my tribe. If I understand the continuum of schema, I can recognize. So when I check the facts and I see that I don't fit in here, okay, is that story accurate? Yes, it is. Okay, why is it accurate? Because these are not my tribe. Then I can also notice that on the continuum of schema, social isolation, social belonging, there are places where I do belong. Right. So when I look at it, yeah, I do belong here. I do have this group of people that get me, that understand me. And if I don't, now that gives me an opportunity for growth so that I can create my tribe. I can find people where I do fit in, where I do belong, and gravitate towards hanging out with those people so that I stop feeling like I'm socially isolated all the time. So just because we attach a meaning to a situation doesn't mean that it's wrong. Sometimes we can attach a meaning to a situation, and this is the dialectical perspective. Sometimes we can attach a meaning to a situation that is completely inaccurate because of the story we're telling ourselves. Oh, I don't fit in here. I don't belong here. Because one person said that they didn't agree with me on something that I said, that doesn't mean that I don't fit in here. That's the story that I'm telling myself. So checking the facts is all about finding out, is the story that I'm telling myself close to actuality, or is it somewhere out here on the continuum of fabrication, right? So again, looking at it from a continuum of story. Over here is what's actually happening. Over here is completely made up. Usually our story is somewhere on that continuum. The closer to actuality it is, the more effective and adaptive it's going to be. The further out here it is, the more maladaptive and ineffective it's going to be. Right. So, yeah, there is an aspect of checking the facts that's about finding the meaning, but we are meaning making machines, man.
Well, and here's the thing too, is these, you're talking about scaffolding, in a sense, the schemas can stack on each other too, as
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Like, I think about, you mentioned defectiveness, self-isolation, emotional deprivation, abandonment. If I have a schema of, not belonging,
Yeah.
all
Social
of those other
isolation.
ones may kick in at the same time as well, right?
Yeah, why don't I belong? Why don't I fit in? Because I'm defective. There's something wrong with me. Okay, what does it mean that I'm defective? Well, because that means I'm a failure. Okay, so you've got schema of social isolation. I don't fit in. Why don't I fit in? Because there's something wrong with me. What does it mean that there's something wrong with me? It means that I'm a failure, right? So these schema, they can cascade into each other. So in emotion regulation, what we're trying to do is check the facts so that we can understand if there is a story that's active in our system. What is that story, and is that story applicable right now? The other thing just to say about emotion regulation skills is that um, the important time to do emotion regulation skills is away from the distress that we're experiencing. So while we're practicing the distress tolerance skills and building our ability to manage the modes, that helps us to react in the moment. To change the rigidity we have to the story is work that is done away from the distress so that we can work with the parts of our personality that are getting activated in the moment, tied to a particular story, so that we can work on the story. If we're trying to do this work in the moment all the time, we're struggling with distress tolerance, and we're not really able to do the emotion regulation work, in my opinion. So when we're doing the emotion regulation work, this is something that we're building into our routine and structure so that we can practice these skills away from the distress so that they kick in when the distress is happening.
Well, and one of the most common ones I think people can relate to when it comes to trying to change a behavior is, I want to do the opposite of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and I'm sure of this too. Next time I get the feeling I'm not going to do that, I'm going to do the opposite of that. And then we, like you just said, get activated. Okay, time to do it. Boop, no, back into automatic behavior.
Yeah.
So if we're trying to practice something like opposite action, let's say,
Yeah.
and we want to do it in, like you're describing, in a baseline period, and do we want to, like, how do we do this? Is it through imagery? How are we trying to train ourselves to be able to do opposite behaviors?
Yeah, for sure. So again, just remembering the process of dialectical behavior therapy, we need to have the mindful awareness of the distress that we're going into. So we notice the distress that's kicking in our system. When we notice the distress, the first thing that we activate is the stop skill. Everything starts with stop. So we stop, we take a deep breath, and we observe and describe what's happening in our system. When we're in that observe and describe phase, there is an opportunity for us to now do something different. Okay, so if every time I feel this way, there is a physical reaction that causes me to go in this direction, and every time I go in this direction, there's a problem, I want to start taking an opposite action. Now, the opposite action skill can be done two ways. Okay, so an opposite action is one of those skills that is kind of a gateway between distress tolerance and emotion regulation. It's one of those skills that kind of hovers on the border of being a distress tolerance skill and an emotion regulation skill. Okay, so in the moment when we notice this distress and we start to feel like we're going to go in this direction, we can take an opposite action with brute force. So a typical example of this is, I wake up in the morning and there's a part of me that feels really sad. There's a schema of social isolation kicking in because I don't fit in and I don't belong. And I'm lying in bed and my internal narrative is, oh, don't go to work today. My avoidant protector is kicking in and it just wants to stay in bed. And I notice this distress because I'm in that avoidant phase, right? I'm not going to go to work today. I'm going to call in sick, right? I'm in distress in that moment. So I notice it. I stop. I take a deep breath and I observe and describe what's happening in my system. Okay, I'm noticing there's a part of me that is feeling like it doesn't want to go to work today. I hear you. I get it. Now I'm going to take an opposite action with brute force. That means I'm just going to get up and do the opposite thing that my system is telling me that I want to do. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to get myself out of bed and I'm going to get in the shower. I'm just going to take an opposite action. Okay, and sometimes from a distress tolerance perspective, that's a really effective thing for us to do. If we want to make that a significant change, though, the problem with that is that the parts, this is when we're integrating schema therapy and DBT, is that the part of our personality that is the avoidant protector gets left behind. So in other words, what we're doing is we're saying to that part that is saying, I just want to stay in bed, screw you, I don't care what you're saying, I'm taking an opposite action. So that part is like, it doesn't learn anything new. So if we want to make this an emotion regulation skill and we want to make it something that is effective in the big picture, now we're going to do this, we're going to take this action mindfully. So what this means is stepping away from the situation and recognizing when we're doing our self-analysis and we're noticing, this morning there was a part of me that wanted to stay in bed. Okay, I'm going to use imagery. So if we drop back into distress tolerance for a moment and go back to the scaffolding perspective of things, in the improved skill, we talk about I being imagination, imagery, like the way that we start to mindfully put ourselves in the space of distressing situations so that we can teach our system how to sit in that space of distress for a little bit, okay? Purpose of the I is the imagination, the imagery work, to be able to sit in the distress for a little bit. Now, building on that, when we're going to practice opposite action from a mindful perspective, I'm going to sit in that space, in that imagery space of being in bed in the morning. I'm going to practice the fact that that I'm sitting in that space and I'm noticing that there is a part of me that wants to stay in bed and not go to work. And I'm going to mindfully take an opposite action with that part, bringing it with me on the journey, showing that part of me how getting up and getting out of bed, getting in the shower, getting dressed, getting in the car and going to work makes me feel better about myself, right? So the mindful imagery work that we can do in taking an opposite action away from it in the moment makes it an emotion regulation skill. In the moment, taking an opposite action with brute force, 100%, it's incredibly effective for distress tolerance, right? So the opposite action skill can be done two ways, in my opinion, when we integrate DBT and schema therapy. First way is more of a distress tolerance skill where we're taking a brute force action, going in a different direction. Second way is a more of an emotion regulation skill where we're actually teaching the part of our personality that the story it's got that I can't do this, the connection that it has to a particular schema is not accurate all of the time. Okay, so opposite action is one of those skills that we're going to do that we can do in two ways.
Well, and while you were talking, I was thinking of when it comes to these skills, I'm in certain spots with certain behaviors at different points. Like when it comes to the emotional regulation and the example you're giving, I can really relate to it because I think it has a lot to do with my life circumstance today too, versus where I was at a different point. But that voice that would wake up in the morning dreading having to get up and be responsible doesn't really exist anymore. Like it's not as capable or debilitating, I guess. And it's through this work, but there's other parts of my life that I'm not there. I'm not at that point when saying that I'm as regulated in my emotions as I'd like to be. I'm still working on those parts, but that specific one is one that I think that gotten pretty far with. Another thing I wanted to talk about was problem solving. Problem solving is a skill set within emotional regulation. Like, obviously, I think people have heard of problem solving, but what do we mean when we're talking about it within the realms of emotional regulation?
Yeah, so problem solving is a series of steps that can be taken in order to try to understand what would be an adaptive and effective thing for us to do in any situation. So um, problem solving is a really big skill and it's a very important skill. So one of the things that I recommend is we're going to just briefly touch on it right now. And this is the same with all of the skills. Like we're going to go through a conversation today that's, going to be roughly about an hour long. If we were going to spend a significant amount of time, or if we're going to spend an appropriate amount of time talking about these skills, you and I would be here all day today. And, that's not what we're going to do.
People, sure.
Well, the emotion regulation aspect of things, like all of the skills modules, they're intended to be learned over a period of time. DBT in its original format was a 12-month program, the skills training program. I truly believe that's the most effective way to do DBT. Yes, there are other ways to do it. Some people do it in 6 months. There are programs that try to implement it in 12 weeks. I don't think you get the same results.
They teach the course and then they teach it again.
Yeah, so in the original format of DBT, the intention is to go through the skills twice. First time around, you're just learning what the skills are. You're getting used to the language. You're understanding what we mean by checking the facts, by taking an opposite action, by problem solving, by planning ahead, by building mastery, by using the stop skill. You're getting used to the lingo, if you like, the language of DBT. Second time around, you're actually starting to implement them and live them and be them, because you don't do DBT, you live DBT if it's going to be effective, right? If you do DBT, it means that you just, I did DBT. I'm doing DBT right now. No, DBT is a lifestyle. It's about living DBT. That's why it takes time to implement these skills. It's not just about knowing them. It's about feeling them. It's about living them. There's a lot of people in DBT circles that intellectually get the skills of DBT. Tons of people. I was one of those people. When I first started DBT, I learned the skills and I put the book back on the shelf and went, yeah, that was great. Awesome. Love it. And occasionally I would use some of those skills. Occasionally it would just be a coincidence that I would remember that these skills were something that I could use. But that's not skills. That's just a coincidence. A skill is an intentional thing that I do, that I build into my repertoire of doing things, so that it becomes an organic process for me to live. I start to live the skill. It starts to become something that's just who I am. It's a part of who I am. It's a part of my way of life. So that's what I mean by DBT being a lifestyle. It's not just a skill set that we intellectually learn. So problem solving is a series of steps that involve us going through observing and describing the situation, checking the facts, making sure that things are in line with actuality, and then working through these steps to get to a point where we kind of analyze what's the different options that I've got, and then taking an action, and then looking at that action to see if the action was effective or if not, and then going back and reanalyzing it. The one thing that I want to say about brainstorming, first of all, check out the video on theliberationplace.com about problem solving. Sorry, just gave away where I'm going. One thing I want to say about problem solving is that check out the video because it lists the steps. There's a worksheet and everything that goes with it. For me, the most important part of the problem solving skill is the piece where we get into what's called brainstorming. So brainstorming in a problem solving capacity is where we start to come up with different ideas, that different actions that we can take, different perceptions, different ways of looking at the situation, different routes that we can take. And the most effective way to do this is with other people. So when we start looking at our support network, brainstorming becomes a time when we're going to access that support network. And this is a really important thing to understand, because when I go brainstorming, who am I reaching out to brainstorm the ideas that I'm looking to explore? So let's just say I've got a group of friends. There's A, B, C, and D. Okay. And I know that these people are all very supportive of me. Okay. A, B, and C will, they're going to validate me. They're going to tell me that, yeah, it's accurate what you're saying there. Yeah, right on. Or that's, they're right, you're wrong, or they're wrong, you're right. Like whatever it is that they're trying to tell me, right? They're agreeing with me. Yes, this is great for validation. Yes, it helps me to feel like uh, I'm right in the way that I'm seeing things. At the same time, it's not effective for me to successfully brainstorm different ideas if the only people that I'm reaching out to are giving me what I want. I want to go to person D that is going to validate me and say, totally get where you're coming from. It makes sense that you feel that way. Now let's look at it from a different perspective. So when I'm brainstorming, I want to be going to people that are giving me different perspectives. My responsibility in the brainstorming is to be open to those different perspectives. So when I'm going through the brainstorming process of the problem solving skill, I'm going to other people to try and find different perspectives. And my responsibility in that process is to be open to those different perspectives so that I can explore lots of different ideas. Does that make sense?
It does. And can I throw one thing in addition to it?
Yeah.
Is I think it's up to me also to communicate to the person what I'm hoping their role in the conversation will be. Like, because I don't necessarily have contrarian friends that I know, okay, every time I go to Josh, he's just going to argue everything I put towards him. But if I say to, because Stephen, I know I can have these discussions with you. If I say, Stephen, I just need your support right now. Do you mind if I tell you something? And you're like, yeah. And I tell you, you would just listen and support me. But if I said, Stephen, I need your help with something, I need some insight, like, I need another eyes on this for me. Then you might take a different, approach to our conversation and be able to give me that type of help in this problem solving. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does. Because again, right, a lot of the time what we do in these situations is when we start reaching out to people, we make assumptions that they know what we're looking for. Right. So, if I'm coming to you to just to kind of flip you coming to me, if I'm coming to you, if I don't tell you what it is that I'm looking for in this conversation, if I just make an assumption that that all I'm looking for is for you to just listen to me right now, and then I come to you and I start telling you what the situation is, and you jump into fix it mode because that's what you want to do. That's, you hear something, so you're going to try to fix the problem. All that's going to do is it's going to activate my defense mechanisms because, well, that's not what I wanted. But that's not on you, that's on me. I need to clearly communicate exactly what it is that I want in this situation. If I'm making assumptions that you know what I want, I need to take a look at that for myself because making assumptions is not something that's healthy and effective and adaptive for us to do. So clear communication about what we need in any situation is really important. So I've got people that I go to, but I had to create this. This isn't something that just naturally happened. I've got people that I go to that when I reach out to them, first thing they say to me is, "What do you need from me in this situation? What is it that you're looking for? In other words, what's your objective?" Right? And sometimes I'll say to these people, I just need to vent about something. I don't need to fix it. I just need to get it off my chest so I can process what's happening. And these people say, go for it, no problem. And they'll just listen to me. They won't give me any feedback. They're not looking to challenge me because that's what I've asked for, right? When I'm going into a brainstorming situation, I'm going to be really clear on what it is that I need in this situation. I'm trying to challenge my thought process. I'm trying to remove the rigid perspective that I've got for a particular situation so that I can see other ideas, other options, different avenues that I can take, other perceptions. So I'm going to communicate that right from the beginning. Hey, listen, Aaron, let's just say I've come to you. Listen, Aaron, I need to brainstorm something with you. I'm going to tell you a situation. I'm going to talk about what my perception is. I want you to help me with this and just let me know what you think. If I'm missing something, give me a different perception because I'm struggling to see things outside of my current way of seeing it. So real clear communication. Or I'm going to come to you and say, listen, Aaron, I'm really annoyed at something. I need to vent about it, and I feel like I'm right, and I need some validation, and I need you to tell me that I'm right. right? If you're not willing to do that, you can tell me, no, I'm not willing to do that. Okay, I'll go and find somebody else. And when I understand my support network, I've got certain people that if I want to be right, I know I'm going to go to those people. I know exactly who it is that I can go to when it comes to my support network to seek that validation and be told that I'm right. It's not emotional validation, action validation. Like, because there's different ways that we validate. Most of the time, emotion regulation starts with validation, is validating the emotional experience, not the action that we're taking. If I'm looking for somebody to validate the action that I'm taking, I'm looking to be told that I'm right. And there are people that I can go to for that. I know that I've got people in my life that when I go to them, they go, holy crap, Steve, yeah, you're right. Right. And I know that they're going to do that. I've also got people in my life that when I go to them and I say something that I'm doing in the way that I'm seeing something, will validate the emotion, get it, understand why you feel the way that you do, and then challenge the way that I'm reacting, challenge the way that I'm seeing it. Those are the people I want to go to when I'm brainstorming. Right? Those are the people that I want to challenge me. And I know if I gravitate towards a certain friend set, exactly what it is that I'm looking for. I'm seeking being told that I'm right here. And after a certain amount of time, I'll go back the other way because I need to get back into that dialectical headspace because sometimes we need to be told that we're right.
And
So, and there's nothing wrong with that. The brainstorming aspect of things is finding those people that, yes, they're going to validate the emotional experience, and at the same time, they're going to give us different ideas, different points of view, different perspectives. The group environment is a great place to do that. If you're going into group and you say in the group space, listen, like this is the way that I'm seeing it, and it's not effective for me to see it this way, but I'm struggling to see it from any other point of view. And it's really interesting if you do that in a group space, the people that are participating in the group, you can hear the ones that go, oh, you're right. I totally get where you're coming from. Sounds like that guy's an arsehole. You're right. He's wrong. Whatever it is that they start buying into. And you can also see the ones that will validate and give you a different point of view. Look at it from a different perspective. Let you know that, yeah, get where you're coming from. I think I'd see it the same way. And at the same time, recognize that, we don't know that it's 100% that this is happening or whatever it is. So brainstorming is a massive part of the problem solving skill. And it's essential that we brainstorm with the demographic of people in our support network that are going to challenge the way that we see the world to give us a different point of view and try to step away from that rigidity. Make sense?
100%, it makes sense. And it brings me back to two things I've learned from attending your groups. One of them is the validation of the why, not the what, right? That whole, I can validate how I'm feeling and what I'm thinking, but I'm not going to validate the behavioral response that isn't effective for the life I want to live. That's not what I'm here to appreciate and validate. And also your evaluation of expectations. When you talk about capability, ability, and willingness, if I'm to go to somebody and recognize that every time, like you use the term fix things, if I realize this person is a fixer, which I have them in my life, for me to think that they're not willing to do so, maybe they're not capable of that. And that's up to me to determine on who I go to for those types of, situations.
Yeah,
Sorry, go
100%. If
ahead.
I'm constantly going to somebody that is that I know evidence based, that I know is a fixer. So there's somebody that jumps in to try to tell me what the way to do something is. If I'm constantly going to them with the expectation that they're just going to listen to me, why do I keep doing that? Right? Why am I putting an expectation on somebody to do something that they've never demonstrated a capability to be able to do? Right? So it's really important to, when we're working with expectations and go into support networks, to understand able, do they have the time to do what it is that I'm asking them to do? Capable, do they have the skills to do what it is that I'm asking them to do? And willing, are they somebody that's demonstrated a desire to do what it is that I'm asking them to do? Really important.
Well, and when it comes to this kind of leads into another skill set is we're talking about the planning ahead to build mastery. You kind of hinted towards this, but when it comes to these conversations and we have the expectation, okay, I'm going to go to Stephen and I'm going to ask him to just listen to me. And I get all prepared for that. Okay, so Stephen's going to listen to me. And somebody goes, yeah, but what if he doesn't? Whoa. Well, and just the thought of it, it snaps me. And what do you mean, what if he doesn't? And it's like, well, let's work with that. Let's work with the planning ahead of the distress that may enter your system if this thing that you so sure is going to happen doesn't. So how do we work with something like that?
Yeah. So in the emotion regulation aspect of things, when we start stepping into removing rigidity, I mean, all of the skills are incredibly important. For me, the most important skill for us to start to learn how to use is an amalgamation of two skills. So in the original DBT format, there is planning ahead, or sometimes it gets called coping ahead. I just prefer to use the term planning ahead. And there is building mastery. What I do with the integration of schema therapy and DBT is I combine those two to create a skill called planning ahead to build mastery. This skill is an evidence-based skill in all sorts of formats, in all walks of life. This has been demonstrated time and time again to be a really effective way for us to learn how to cope or deal with emotional activation in situations in the future based on the way that we've reacted to them in the past. So anytime we're trying to work with an emotional reaction, so the key concept to planning ahead to build mastery is knowing that we are not planning ahead to build mastery for the situation. We're planning ahead to build mastery for the emotional activation. So situations can change. People can say things that we weren't expecting them to say. People can do things that we weren't expecting them to do. Emotional reaction is usually pretty consistent. So when somebody does something that I'm not expecting them to do, how am I going to feel? When somebody says something that challenges the way that I'm currently seeing the situation, how am I going to feel? Am I going to be afraid? Am I going to be angry? Am I going to be disgusted? Am I going to be ashamed? Am I going to feel guilty? What is going to come into my system? If we plan ahead for that by using past experiences. So let's say I've come to you in a conversation before and I've said to you, hey, Aaron, I need to talk to you about a particular situation. And your reaction activated an angry part of my personality. Okay. I know that this, and this has happened multiple times. I know that this is a consistent reaction that I have when I'm in conversation with you. So if I want to have a conversation with you where that reaction is not something that I do, I need to plan ahead to build mastery for the emotion of anger getting activated in conversations with you. So how do I do that? Away from the situation, and this is so important, I sit down and I plan for the future conversation. So there is an element of planning ahead to build mastery. Step one, if you like, is planning ahead. Right? I'm going to write it down. I'm going to sit down and go through this specific worksheet where we ask the question, what's the situation that you are facing? And what are some possible outcomes? So the way that I like to do it is what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And what's something in the middle? Okay. I'm planning ahead for some possible outcomes so that I can understand how I'm going to feel if those things play out. So I'm using scenarios, but I'm also trying to focus on the emotion that gets activated in those scenarios. So in the best case scenario, if I say to you, hey, I just want to talk about this, and you do everything that I think that I want you to do, what my expectation is, how am I going to feel? Because sometimes we don't know how to react when somebody does what we want them to do. Sometimes that sends us into a tailspin of like, oh, they're just doing that to manipulate me or whatever, right? You know, so it changes the story in our system. So how am I going to feel if you do exactly what I want you to do? How am I going to feel if this goes in a worst case scenario? If you say, screw you, Stephen, I'm not doing that, you asshole, and you start attacking me, how am I going to feel? How am I going to react to that in order to in order to stay true to being the person I want to be in that situation? You know, if when you react that way, it activates a part of me, that means we get into an altercation or a verbal and physical confrontation, and that's not who I want to be. I need to plan for that emotional reaction. And then what's something in the middle? How am I going to feel if yeah, you don't agree with me, but you don't disagree with me. We kind of go through a back and forth. Like, how am I going to feel in that? Again, it's all about how I'm going to feel. So I plan ahead for that. Then the next step, which is absolutely essential, is the imagery work to build mastery. So I'm going to set aside a time in my routine and structure to actually sit down and rehearse this situation in my mind. I'm going to put myself in the situation where I'm having that conversation with you, and I'm going to rehearse the different scenarios in my thought process and planning and building mastery for the emotional experience. And I'm going to practice and I'm going to practice and I'm going to practice this over and over again so that I can build mastery for the emotional experience and how I'm going to react in that situation. This is something that is a proven skill set in all sorts of walks of life. You hear it talked about with musicians, with sports people, with people who give speeches. They stand up and they rehearse how they're going to feel. Public figures, when they're going to address somebody about something, they rehearse it over and over again. Actors, why do you think they have rehearsals? Because they're planning for how they're going to deal with something, right? This is something that is well proven. And people with emotional dysregulation, people like that's how I used to deal with life, was I'd get emotionally dysregulated and all these maladaptive and ineffective skills would come out in me. Like the ability to use substances and things like that would suddenly be, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. You know, people who respond in that way don't have mastery for that emotional experience. So when we're getting into the emotion regulation aspect of things, it's all about planning ahead and then rehearsing how how we are going to feel when those situations play out. And it's one of the most difficult things for us to do because, quite often there's parts of us that are like, well, I don't want to do that. Okay, then we're going to spend a lot of time in distress tolerance, and emotion regulation is going to be a problem. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. And like as you're speaking, there's two things I thought of. One was when you're talking about how a person may respond to someone doing everything that they've asked of them. I thought about toxic transactional relationships and how that may make a perception of a person who's doing everything. It's like, oh, you're just doing this because you want to get something from me. That may be because I've lived in a lot of toxic transactional relationships. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Well, you use the term anger, and it's a specific emotion that I want to pick at for a second, because if we're working at emotional regulation with an emotion that you and I are in the same thought in that anger is never a primary emotion, it is secondary, tertiary, it could be way down the line.
Yeah.
Are we trying to figure out what the anger is, or are we going to work with the anger?
It depends on where you're at in the process, right? If you're working with, first things first, if you, okay, so to start with, we want to work with the anger, okay? Because if there's a part of me that is that's responding with anger, I want to work with that part of me to understand why it thinks it's got this rigid behavioral response. Why does it have to respond with the anger? Ultimately, I want to work with, because the anger is a protection mechanism. It's keeping something safe underneath it, right? Ultimately, I want to get to the part of me that's underneath that the angry part of me is trying to protect. But first of all, I've got to work with the part of me that's trying to protect it. If I bypass the part of me that's angry and I don't do the work with that particular the schema that's activating that particular mode of behavior, if I dive straight into trying to work with the vulnerability that's underneath it, it's just going to activate the part of me that's angry. This happened to me when I started to work with do this type of work, and somebody said to me, talk to me about, there's a vulnerable child that's underneath the surface that's dealing with sadness and loneliness and guilt and shame, and ultimately we need to get there. I went, okay, great, and dived straight into working with that vulnerability, and I was pissed off at the world. Why? Because I was having an emotional backlash. The part of me that was angry was like, screw you. You're not going into that to work with that, to connect with that vulnerability that's in my system. I'm going to be angry trying to control what everybody else is doing. And I was lashing out at people left, right, and center. That was the emotional backlash that happened in my system. So when we're working with parts of us that are angry, we have to work with the part that's angry and the reason why it's angry first before we can go underneath it and look at what the part is that it's trying to protect. That's what we mean by the anger being a secondary emotion, or further down the line, wherever it is in the process, is that it's a protection mechanism for something else underneath. And in my opinion, anger can become an addictive process because there's a sense of control that comes from it. When that part of us gets angry, trying to control what's happening out there with other people, it gives us this feeling like, yeah, I've got this under control for a split second. And after that split second has passed, we often fall into feelings of guilt and shame because being angry and lashing out at people does not help us to live the life we want to live, be the person we want to be, according to our true, authentic values and beliefs. So, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we can have about anger being an addictive process. But working with parts of us that are angry is we have to work with the anger first instead of just going, okay, anger is a secondary emotion. What's underneath it? No, Anger, yeah, okay, anger is a secondary emotion, but we need to spend some time with the part of us that's angry to build trust so that we can start working with what it is that it's protecting. And some of it.
I do. And in this process, I find that there's a lot of slipping and falling. It's like I get a little bit and then I feel like I've gone two steps back. And it's easier to recognize those failures than it is to recognize the positive events, as we say,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
My question is, how do I make sure that I'm not just recognizing the positive events, but doing it in an effective way when it comes to
Yeah.
supporting my system?
Yeah, so emotion regulation, DBT skill, paying attention to positive events is a skill that needs to be used or is effective when it's used in multiple different ways. First of all, most of us struggle with the problem with instant gratification, seeking that external reward all the time to build motivation for us to do things. In the short term can be incredibly effective, but that's also where addictive, obsessive, and compulsive behavior patterns come from, that problem with instant gratification. So we need to learn how to build internal motivation, and paying attention to positive events is how we do this. And it's a mindfulness exercise. It's about taking a time out from the day and sitting with the things that we've done throughout the day that have helped us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be in the areas of life that are important to us according to our true, authentic values and beliefs. Right? We pay attention to those. We acknowledge that they're there, and we bring gratitude and appreciation to the parts of our personality that helped us to achieve those things. Okay, that's just a general practice that we want to start to build into our structured lifestyle every day, just checking in with things that we've done that have been effective and adaptive for us to live the life we want to live, and bringing appreciation and gratitude to the parts of our personality that helped us to do that. This builds internal motivation. There's a ton of research out there that tells us that. Also, paying attention to positive events is what we want to do to acknowledge parts when we've taken an opposite action. So, if we've taken an opposite action in the day and it took us in a different direction and we recognize that we did that, we want to really pay attention to the positive events that happened there and bring appreciation and gratitude to the action that was taken. So earlier when we were talking about validating the why and not the what, that's if we're working with a part of our personality that has an emotional experience, because the emotion is always valid, but the action that we're taking doesn't line up with living the life we want to live. So we validate the emotion, not the action that we're taking. When we're paying attention to positive events, we're not only validating the emotional experience, we're also validating the action that was taken, because that's going to build motivation for that part to do it again. So paying attention to positive events is all about recognizing parts of our personality that have taken the actions that help us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be, and bringing appreciation and gratitude to them in a mindfulness exercise. So literally just sitting in the space of noticing, what, that went really well, and there was a part of me that behaved this way. I am really grateful and extremely appreciative of the part of me for, I've got massive amounts of appreciation for the part of me that actually helped me to achieve that thing. So if I set in my schedule today and I was going to focus on my physical health, so the area of life that was important to me today was my physical health, and I'm going to get up at a certain time, I'm going to eat a healthy diet, I'm going to avoid mood altering substances, I'm going to exercise, practice my exercise routine, and I'm going to go to bed at a healthy time. When I'm winding down at the end of the day and I've gone through that entire process, I'm going to recognize the part of my personality. Look, I did this today. I woke up at this time, I ate a healthy diet, I practice, I'm practicing good sleep hygiene, didn't go to any mood altering substances, I did my exercise routine. I'm super appreciative and very grateful for the part of me that did that. Okay, so paying attention to positive events is about checking in with our system when something has gone the way we want it to go, when it's helped us to live the life we want to live and be the person we want to be, and bring appreciation and gratitude to the parts of us that helped us to do that, to build motivation to do more. It's really important. It's how we build that internal motivation.
Well, and tell me what you think of this. Like external example I give is when I hold the door for a person, I don't do it because I want them to say thank you. I do it because I like to hold the door for a person. However, if they don't say thank you, there's a part of me that goes, I'm not fucking holding the door for you again. Sorry, but don't. But that's what the
That's
part
okay.
says in my head. And I think it happens on a here's the thing. When I hold the door for a person, I don't expect them to buy me an ice cream. Okay. I don't expect them to get me a chocolate bar or do something externally rewarding. All I'm expecting is a thank you. And I think it happens internally as well, is that if there's a part of me that's doing all these kind things for me and I can't even say, you know what, thank you, it
Yeah,
just it crosses its arm and goes, well, then I'm not going to hold the door for you anymore, Aaron.
exactly. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
is.
we have that expectation externally, but we don't realize there's that expectation internally. So it's a really great point that the internal world works exactly the same as the external world, right? In the external world, we're responding to everything that we're hearing, everything that people are saying to us. The internal world, we're responding to the internal narrative. It's exactly the same process, it's just internally. And getting your head around that, there are parts of our personality that want to be acknowledged. They want to be appreciated. They want to be recognized for what they do. And if all we do is focus on the parts of us that are not doing what we want them to do, so the parts of us that are using ineffective and maladaptive coping mechanisms, if that is the only thing we focus on, then the parts of us that are living the life we want to live and helping us to be the person that we want to be are going to go, screw you, I'm not doing that anymore. So building internal motivation, it's a really great point that you make. Building internal motivation is all about recognizing those parts, because there's in some way there is an expectation that that recognition is going to be there.
Well, as you're speaking, it makes me think of my own childhood, and it's like, why was I misbehaving like so much as a kid? Because that's when they would look at me. That's when I'd actually get some attention. You did well. Nobody was looking at you. Nobody was paying attention. But as soon as you started misbehaving, everybody had their eyes out.
Exactly.
Important. But okay, I think we're good on emotional regulation. The next chapter, I believe, is going to be interpersonal effectiveness. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah.
So for the people listening, please tune in. We're going to keep doing this as long as we can, and I hope people are enjoying the content. I'm enjoying the discussions. We woke up bright and early. You guys get to listen to this whenever you get to listen to this, but Stephen and I have been up since before the sun, I think, today, to make sure we could get this into our schedules. And grateful, dude, that I can start my day with this kind of exercise, you know?
Yeah, and I just want to just before we wrap up, I just want to say that we're talking about these skills in a short conversation. It's been about an hour of us talking about it. Um, like I mentioned before, these skills take a lot of time to build into our routine and structure to become a part of the way that we're living our lives. So, we've briefly gone over the skills today, most of the skills of emotion regulation. I highly recommend taking a look at theliberationplace.com, the YouTube channel, surf around on there and take a look, because each of the skills, there's an individual video for each of the skills on the website. There's an individual worksheet for each of the skills to help you start to build them into the way that you're living your life. Come to the free groups that I facilitate on Wednesdays, on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. Again, look at the website for those times, because um, it takes time to build this stuff into your way of life. So just because we know the skills doesn't mean we're living the skills, and it takes practice and practice and practice and being around the conversation. So take a look at all that stuff. Yeah, hopefully this conversation has given you some insight for what emotion regulation is all about. But building it into your life takes time, and it's a process that we have to go through, and it can be frustrating. There can be difficult times with it. The important part of it is building consistency into the way that we're practicing them by implementing them into our daily structure.
Yeah, I live DBT. I
Yeah,
don't do DBT. I
yeah,
like that perspective of things, and I'm trying to live it in every area of my life that I can,
absolutely.
because it really is. And it's when you say that thing about knowing it and, oh, I read the book, it's over there. I can really relate to that, because I can talk about a lot of the tools, but I still got, when you bring up like accepts and improves and all those, Raven is one I've really, I think, put into my system now, but those other ones are just more academic to me. They haven't become a part of me. You
Yeah,
know, I'll throw one funny little quote from Wayne's World to people. It's kind of like a new pair of underwear. At first they're restrictive, but then they become a part of you. And that's how I feel with DBT. It's like some of it's a little weird at first, but then it just becomes natural.
yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.